coming up. So if you haven't gone to one before, you should really try to get there. It's a lot of fun. So you're going to mainly be hearing from Angel tonight. He's sitting right here. He's the youth leader of the church. He's going to come and give the main portion of the message, but I'm going to open up for him. So we've been talking about getting past the pain. This is our third lesson in the series. We had to take a little break last week. So we're going to do a quick review first. So basically we've been talking about this whole series is based on past pains we've experienced. Not so much geared towards what you're going through right now if you're going through a trial or a struggle, but maybe something you had when you were a kid, something that happened when even just a couple years ago, something you just feel like you can't seem to let go of. And it starts to affect all these different areas of your life. Maybe there's a struggle, and I think we all have some struggle that we can immediately think to when we talk about a past pain or a past hurt. God doesn't want us to stay there. He doesn't want us to hold on to this past pain and just ride it out for the rest of our lives. He wants to take that away from us. He wants to give us a peace about it. He wants to give us joy. He wants to give us the fruit of the Spirit through these past hurts. So we talked first about that statistically speaking, everyone has some kind of past pain. Some are maybe less extreme as others, but there are pains that everyone deals with and that affect every part of our lives. And then we also talked about how God wants to take it away. We all know that God can do things. It's kind of different to think of it as He also wants to do these things. God has the power to do anything in our lives, but there's a lot of things He wants to do for us. We just need to let Him do it. We talked about God being our Father and not our earthly father, and to try to break that stereotype of what our fathers were like growing up and seeing that God is the ultimate Father. So we've talked about that, and today Angel's going to come up. He's going to talk a little bit about being transparent. But before we do that, I want to tell you a little story. So there was the Washington Monument. Everybody's seen this before in Washington, D.C., correct? Or at least in a picture of it, whether you've been there or not. So there's this issue with the Washington Monument. It was deteriorating. And this is a true story. This is actually happening. There was a problem. So they hired all these scientists, all these scholars or whoever to try to figure out why this monument was deteriorating faster than all the other monuments that they had. It wasn't older than the rest of them, but for some reason it was just eroding away. So they asked the question, why is it deteriorating? What is happening with the Washington Monument that it's deteriorating? And so they came up with this answer. They have to use harsh chemicals to clean it. And what we call that is the Band-Aid answer. And this is where many of us live in our Christian lives. Why am I angry all the time? Well, because so-and-so said something to me. Why do I get jealous and judgmental of other people? Well, because they have life better than I do. Or whatever it is. We all revert to that Band-Aid answer. What is it that's going to appease my question right now? The shallow answer. So they decided that they were going to go a little deeper than just saying, oh, we use harsh chemicals. So they said, why do you use harsh chemicals? So they get the Band-Aid answer number 2. The monument was covered in pigeon poop. All right, so it took a bunch of these scholars to figure out, we're cleaning this monument off because it's covered in pigeon poop. Now, there's the Band-Aid answer number 2. Maybe you dig a little deeper. We see that's pigeon poop, so there's the problem. Let's fix that problem. Well, no, let's go a little deeper. Why is there so much pigeon poop? Why are there so many pigeons that there's that much poop that we have to use harsh chemicals to clean it off? So they asked, why is there so much pigeon poop? Well, pigeons eat spiders, and the grounds for the monument were covered in these spiders. Band-Aid answer number 3. So what's the next question, guys? How do we keep digging? We've said, why is the monument deteriorating? Why are they using harsh chemicals? Why is there so much pigeon poop? Why are there so many spiders? Well, here we go. Spiders love gnats. And gnats are everywhere. There are so many gnats on the monument that they're bringing spiders there. Spiders are inhabiting it because of these gnats. Do we stop there or do we dig deeper? Dig deeper. Why are there so many gnats? The gnats are attracted to the light shining on the monument. They bathe the monument on lights on the monument. And they go on at dusk, but they don't change it based on the season. They never thought to do that. They just go on at dusk. So because they put these lights on earlier than they probably should, the ground's get infested with gnats. Spiders inhabit the place to eat the gnats. Pigeons surround the place to eat the spiders. Pigeons poop all over the monument. They have to use harsh chemicals to clean the monument, and the monument is deteriorating. What we call that is the root cause. The lights are going on too early. And this is a real story. They fixed all of this by having the lights start like 2 hours later. And all of it stopped. The monument was saved by changing a time in lighting. It's the same thing for us. We have results that we deal with every day. Some of us have anger issues. Some of us have jealousy. Some of us are super judgmental. Some of us are very sensitive. Some of us, we can't open up to our spouses. We can't be real. We can't be honest with people. We build that wall, that defensive wall. It's time that we stop just accepting that. You know, I see it from time to time, people who went through something in their past, and they're almost gloating about it. Oh, well, I can't get close to people because this happened in my past. That's not okay. That's not okay. That's not where God wants us to live. That's not something that we should just have to deal with for the rest of our lives. We need to dig deeper and find out why we have these pains and resolve the root cause. Which brings us to cause and effect. It's a lot easier to put a Band-Aid over the results instead of digging deep to deal with the cause. If you look at all our slides, have you noticed that the background is dirt and Band-Aids are all over the place? This is what this whole thing was about. This is what the central theme of our series was about, was digging deeper. We started off the whole series by saying, think of a time in your life, think of a pain that you haven't been able to deal with, and focus on dealing with that through this series. It's a cause and effect. Because this happened, we're dealing with the effects now. Anytime there's underlying issues, they have an effect on random areas of our lives. When you were abused as a child, during that abuse, you didn't say, oh man, now I'm going to have to deal with putting up barriers and not having true relationships when I get older. That's not what you're thinking about. You're thinking about how much pain you were in because of the abuse. If you were left alone as a child or even as an adult and no one accepted you, and now you put on this fake facade, you didn't purposely do that. It's a habit that we built. So we're going to talk about, or Angel's going to talk about, how we can get past the effects by dealing with the cause. So first we have our action points. If you want to pull out the pamphlet that we handed out, everybody should have got one. Did anyone not get one? Can someone run and get the pamphlets up back and just hand them to people with their hands raised? Anyone mind? Thank you, Sarah. So, sorry, I muted it. It's my fault. So, I want you to think of that past pain that we talked about. Maybe it's more than one. Maybe it was a series of pains that you've dealt with. Maybe it was your whole childhood. Whatever it was that you know you haven't been able to get past. And I want you to think of these. We're going to look at these effects. And I want you to pick one that you find shows up in your life more than you would like it to. And we'll have a time to look deeper at these effects and see if we can dig down to the root cause of them. So, do you find yourself looking at everything negatively? Are you just that negative person? Everything else in the world could be completely fine. Everyone around you is smiling and happy, and they say, oh, isn't this a great day? And you're like, yeah, it would be a great day if it was a few degrees hotter. You know, that Debbie Downer, that one who's always just bringing things negative. We have the compellers, and we call Lenny our Debbie Downer. Not because he's a negative guy, but we get excited about some idea, and he's like, wow, he's like Squidward on SpongeBob. So we all go, wah, wah. So do you look at everything negatively? Do you assume bad intentions? When someone does something good for you, do you assume that there's some kind of an ulterior motive, some bad intentions? Do you find yourself becoming easily frustrated by meaningless things? You get frustrated, and then afterwards, after you've already spouted off or you've gotten really upset, you look back and you go, why was I so upset about that? Like, what was the point of that? Do you find yourself doing this frequently? Do you have the feeling like you have to prove yourself to people? I have to prove that I'm strong enough to handle life. I have to prove that I'm strong enough to deal with this issue. I'm responsible for everything. It's all on me. If I'm not going to do it, then who's going to do it? I have to be in control. Feeling like you have to make everything work out, that kind of ties hand in hand with the last one. Do you feel like you have to hold the reins of life? Are you the type of person that when someone else is doing something, if they don't do it your way, then you're going to go back and you're going to do it again, and you're going to make sure it gets done the way you want it to get done, even though both ways are fine? Do you find yourself blaming yourself and thinking that everything is your fault? I think it's a pretty universal one. You blame yourself for things that have nothing to do with you. And then lastly, do you find yourself getting offended easily? You're offended by people. You're offended by things that people say, a look that someone gave you. You do something and they don't acknowledge you, and then you get your little feelings hurt. You say hi to someone and they didn't hear you and they have their head down, they keep walking. Well, you just assume that they're either mad at you or they don't appreciate you enough to actually spend a moment to say hi. You find yourself getting easily offended. So take a moment, look at these. It may be more than one. You can either write it down on the left-hand side or on the right-hand side. You'll see them all written out there. Go ahead and circle the one that you find yourself dealing with. Now, honestly, I think we've all at times dealt with every single one of these. But which one do you find yourself doing a lot more frequently than you would like? We're going to take some time today, and we're going to try to dig down by being transparent. Angel's going to talk about transparency. And I'll warn you ahead of time, Angel may cry. It's going to be a hard message to preach because it's about being transparent, and in order to do that, Angel's got to be pretty transparent. One of the things that we've learned, the two of us, going through this, we've gotten a really much tighter relationship because of this series, because we've had to be extremely transparent with each other. I've said things to him that only Allie knows. So it's been a rough road. It's been a great road, a gracious road. But sometimes transparency is really what we need. So Angel's going to come on up, and he's going to talk to you about transparency.
That's for Cap. Oh, I better get my water now because I'm not going to cry. All right. How we doing? All right. So now let's talk honesty and let's talk transparency. And like Pat said, when we talked about this briefly when we started the series of, we sat down and, I had a message in mind, and the title of my message was, I've made a mess of me. And then Pat was like, I had this thing where just dealing with past hurt, dealing with past pain, and so we this is how this was birthed. And so we're like, well, we started talking about things, just kind of spitballing and getting ideas, and so we were sitting there talking. I'm like, mine, if we go back, I become easily frustrated over meaningless things. And then after I'm done being frustrated and I've yelled or I've had to prove my point or make my point, I look back and I'm like, I was so stupid, right? I don't know why. For some reason, dishes in the sink sets me off, makes me upset. And the other thing, and the teens know this, people that ride their bikes every morning when we're coming to church, Sunday school, and I see these people riding their bikes on the road. I don't know why, it just aggravates me. So, so we had to be honest. We had to be transparent, and that can be awkward, and that can be difficult because, I know Pat, but I didn't know Pat like I know my wife, and, I share things with her, and I share some stuff that only a few people know. And so he's like, well, okay, so you get frustrated. Well, why? Right? Just going back to the illustration. Well, why do you think you get frustrated? Because of that. I'm like, well, I don't know. And then I'm like, well, I like things done a certain way. He's like, well, why? I'm like, well, I kind of model that after my father. I like things getting done a certain way. He's like, okay, but why? So why do you like that? So we dig deeper, and then all of a sudden I'm like, well, you know what? One time I was in RU, and we were in a breakout session, and there's just a bunch of guys around there, and we're talking, and one of the guys is giving a testimony about his childhood, and he's saying how childhood was rough, and when he grew up, he suffered abuse at the hand of his stepfather. It was verbal, it was physical, and it was emotional abuse. And as he's talking, all of a sudden I felt like the room just zoomed in right on me, right? I just felt really small, and I felt scared, and I was in almost panic mode, because all of a sudden at that point, I started remembering things that I thought I forgot. I started remembering things that I wished never to remember again. And so I'm like, you know what, Pat? This is what happened to me. I remember being a kid and being taken advantage of by a babysitter. And I've only shared that with a few people. And so because of this experience, right, it's affected my relationships growing up. It's affected how I've dealt with people. It's affected my marriage and how I deal with things, because I don't want to be taken advantage of, so I want things done a certain way, and they're going to be done my way, because no one's going to pull a fast one on me. And so we got to the root cause of it, and I can share that now because I've forgiven, and I've been forgiven. And so it doesn't bother me. Is it embarrassing? Yeah, it's embarrassing. Who wants to, right? But I can share that with you in hopes that helps somebody here, because that's what it did. I mean, our relationship has grown so much more than it ever would have. And so I remember doing that. I remember going up to pastor's office and talking to pastor, and I'm sure pastor wasn't ready for that. He's like, what the heck, But that's affected me, and but developing that root cause allows me to almost catch myself when situations happen. So I don't think the dishes bother me too much anymore, right, babe? Not too much, but it's one of those things like I can walk in and be like, ugh, the dishes. I don't know why. It's like my kryptonite. I don't know. I have issues. That and people chewing. But so why do we need to be honest? Who do we need to be honest with and transparent
Well, right
with?
now, before
Why?
we get into the message,
Well, first, I think we need to be honest with God.
we want to play a little video
Right?
for you.
I think first we need to be honest
Coming
with God.
up,
Well,
the
God's
end
omniscient,
of
right? So he's everywhere. He's all-knowing, and he sees
April,
everything. So we really can't hide.
we'll be having
So
financial
we can hide
Peace
from each
University,
other,
so there's
right?
a
We can
video
fake
on
it.
the slide
We can
for it.
we
Can
can
you
hold
find that,
things back
Austin?
from our spouses, from our
Probably
kids,
the
from
one
our
that's black.
parents.
Yeah, let's try that.
We can do that, right? We can pull the Adam and Eve, and we can sow our fig leaves, right? And cover ourselves up, and we can look good, and we can serve,
Financial
and we
Peace
can act
University
like
began about
everything's
20
good. And I'm
years
going
ago.
to my
And
Bible
now
circles,
today we've had
and
over
I always have a
1.5
smile on my
million
face. Nothing
families
wrong.
go through this
We can do
course.
that for
This
a
is the
while,
place where
for
we
a
start
long time.
happening to our money, where we
But
start
God
aiming our
starts
dollars
to be honest
at
with God.
our goals. You got to make your money behave.
Secondly, we
You
need to be
work
honest with
too
ourselves.
hard to get to the end of your life and be broke. There's a massive group of people out there trying to sell you stuff. They want to interrupt
You know what
your
happens?
plans. Don't cash
So
out
it
your
starts with,
401k. I know your
first being honest
401k
with
looks like a
God.
201k. Remain calm.
Ourselves.
The only people that get hurt on a roller coaster are those that jump off.
We start
God's all in
putting
this
on a
thing.
front.
He's all
We
about
start
fixing you. He's
believing
all
our
about
own
fixing
lie
me.
because we
There's a
get so used to our
redemption story
story.
built into this whole
Or this
thing.
story, or a
And
version
every
of that
time I
story
give,
that
every
causes me
time I
to
understand
forget
I'm
what
not an
reality
owner,
really is.
I'm
And then
Follow-
lastly,
now I
we
gotta
need to be
follow
honest
Dave,
with each other.
and try to
And,
be.
that's
run. Let's go.
it's awkward. But it's time to put the awkwardness aside.
but we don't wanna do that right now.
And,
So,
and face your fears.
Brandy,
and confess your faults one to
Marie
another.
LeBlanc,
And guys,
where
this
are
is like-
you?
this is the importance of our
here?
Bible life circles, and I'm just gonna
Wanna
kinda
sign
put a plug
up?
in right there. If you're not involved in a Bible life circle,
Almost want to take it
get
again.
involved. Get involved in community.
Trish and I
Start
took Financial
building
Peace
relationships
last,
that matter, and start talking about things and get on that road to healing, that road to redemption. Tell your story.
You gotta
We all
run
have a
for
story.
your life.
So that story helped me get healing, and I told my story. So
Very
hopefully,
surely
someone here can help someone else.
Could we as believers
So why do we-
change?
Well, what do I gain? Right? What do I gain by being transparent and honest? Well, first I'd say we gain freedom. Right? The ability to walk with confidence.
Almost want to take it again.
I think that's huge. Because you've been set free from these weights that have been holding you down for so long, you can finally, instead of keeping your shoulders
All right, now
like this,
before
you
we
can-
get into the
you can let your
message,
shoulders relax a little,
um,
and you can
we
breathe.
want to play a little video for
and
you.
walk with confidence. And then,
Coming up, the
secondly,
end
we develop
of
that sweeter relationship with God, and you see God orchestrate I'm just this
One-
healing and redemption in your life or in the life of others. It builds that sweet relationship that we all long for with God, and it affirms our faith. And then, thirdly, a tighter bond with each other, right? You've gained your brother, you've gained your sister. You draw closer to your spouse, to your parents, to your children. And you're able to walk in fellowship, and you're able to walk in confidence and have those sweeter relationships. And then lastly, it just gives relief. It gives relief from the weight and the shame and the pain and the hurt that you've held on to for all those years.
It's a year, right? Was it? Yeah.
They say, well, that's good. Well, how do I do it? Right? How do I do that? How do I get to a point where I'm like that? I mean, I've done it this way. It's the way I've always done it, right? I mean, what are people going to think? Right? What are people going to think of me when I start actually being honest? Right? Because everyone's been believing my lie, right? They've been believing what I show them. I don't want to dig it up. I'm not ready to go there because it just hurts way too much to get down there and to be honest. I'm not sure if I'm ready.
Well, right now,
I don't
before we
wanna
get
accept
into the
fact
message,
that it's had such a hold
we want to
on
play.
my life and my relationships. And we're not talking about excuses. We're talking about getting past excuses and dealing with the real issues. Taking responsibility and allowing God to heal you. But how does that work? How do we do that? Well, it takes faith. And what does the Bible say about faith? Hebrews 1, right? You guys probably all could quote it. Now, faith is the substance of what? Things hoped for, right? The evidence of things not seen. You have to trust that when you begin to open this box up, when you start to dig back, and you open the door, and you face the wounds, the hurts of your past, that God's going to see you through it to the end. In Deuteronomy 31:6, he says, I will never leave thee. Right? In Psalm 23:4, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. In Romans 8:31, if God is for me, who can be against me? And a great illustration of faith and taking that first step of being transparent and being honest with God, ourselves, and each other comes from a movie you guys might know. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Right? Now I have to confess first, I haven't seen these movies. I've seen pieces. I got to make sure because Jay's right there and I don't want him to call me out. And so he says I'm un-American because I haven't seen Indiana Jones. And up until a couple of years ago, I'd never seen Star Wars. And Jay, I thought or Back to the Future. Oh, Tom was talking to me just this afternoon. He's like, hey, did you see the Back to the Future thing? I was like, I've never seen Back to the Future. He just looked at me like in utter disgust, like, we go to the same church? I felt so ashamed. I'm like, oh my word, I better go repent. But anyways, I have seen bits and pieces of these movies. I just haven't seen all of, in there. I did watch the last Indiana Jones, and it was horrible. So I'm like, oh, whatever. But so in the Last Crusade, Indy, he's running right. He goes down this narrow cave, and then he comes out to a spot where there's this big, vast opening, right? And the cliff drops off, and he's got to get to the other side. And he's looking at his map, and he's like, "Oh, it says I have to get over here." And he says, "Where the lion's head is, the lion's head's right here." And he's just like, well, what am I going to do? He's like, oh, I gotta take the leap of faith, right? So he's just like, he sits there, he looks at the book, and he looks at the opening that's over there by Zach's head, and he's like, all right. He's like, I'm just going to trust it. And what does he do? He boom, and the bridge is there, right? And then they pan out to the side, and then you see the bridge, and what happens? The bridge is, it's just meshed to its surroundings. So at first glance, you don't see the bridge. It's like that. It's trusting that God's going to be right there, and He's going to be walking right with you. And for us, if you're a believer here, you're never really alone. Matthew 28:20, verse B, I am with you always, even until the end of the age. Amen. That's Jesus speaking. You know what? And in moments of greatest weaknesses, remember that being alone requires grace alone. Right? And grace is not just seen in forgiveness of past sins, but it's also the strength to withstand future sins and situations that are going on right now. And not only that, grace provides power to remain faithful in the most difficult of circumstances. And we see Jesus says right here in 2 Corinthians 12:9, my grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weakness. And just remember that God is in control of everything. He's not gonna forget you. He hasn't forgotten you. And He's going to be right there in whatever the circumstances are. Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, who are called according to His purpose. So if we're going to be transparent, if we're going to start to be honest and look back and try to look at the root cause of things, right? We want to know why. Well, why is all the pigeon poop there, right? If that's, we could use that for an analogy, right? Why do I have all this pigeon poop in my life? You open those doors, we may not like what we have to face. And it's going to require leaning into some of these verses and just knowing that God is with you and knowing that, trusting in faith that His grace is sufficient for you and knowing that everything's going to work together for His good. And that ain't going to be easy. But you know what? Your pain often reveals God's purpose for you. And so in 2 Corinthians 4:8-9, we are hard, I love this verse, we are hard pressed on every side, yet not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. What a promise. God never wants to waste a hurt. I don't think He wants us to waste our trials, our pain, those past pains. And we're not talking about scars. I just want to reiterate that. Scars are past pains that have already been healed. We're talking about the open wounds that we've put Band-Aids on. We're not talking about the scars. The scars tell a story. The wounds are still waiting to be healed. So if you've gone through a hurt, He wants you to help other people going through the same hurt. Your pain often reveals God's purpose for you. He wants you to share it, just like I shared my story. And not every story is going to be dramatic, and not every story is going to be glamorous. But He wants, God can use the problems in your life to give you a ministry to others. In fact, the very thing that you hate the most about yourself, the very thing that really just you resent the most, could become your greatest ministry in helping other people. And so I want to bring your attention to a guy that I met in summer camp. Some of you guys know him. His name is Pastor Dave O'Donnell. And for those of you that don't know him, Pastor Dave O'Donnell stutters. And so we were at camp, and we had chapel inside because we had some crazy thunderstorms that were making the tent just get crazy. And so we're inside, and it's hot, and it's sweaty. And he starts telling his testimony of growing up and how he's dealt with stuttering. And he would never raise his hand to answer any questions, right? Because he could never get the words out. He would never volunteer to do anything because of his stuttering. And he saw that as a handicap that couldn't be used, right? And he gives this illustration of every time he would want to go get ice cream, right? He wanted Moose Tracks, and so he had in his mind, I want Moose Tracks ice cream, so I'm going to get up there and I'm going to order some Moose Tracks ice cream. So he's all confident, he's got it going, and then he gets up to there and he just cannot get the words out, and all he can say is vanilla. And so he's like, every time, I don't know what happens. He's like, I get up there, I really want Moose Tracks, but I always end up with stinking vanilla because I just can't get it out. And so God used him and called him into the ministry, and God is using him to bless others, and they can see that physical handicap. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 4 through 6. Who comforts us in all tribulation, that we may be able to comfort those who are in trouble, with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. For as the suffering of Christ abounds in us, so our consolation also abounds through Christ. Now, if we are afflicted, it is for your consolation and salvation, which is effective for enduring the same suffering which we also suffer. Or if we are comforted, it is for your consolation and salvation. And this is what's called redemptive suffering. Redemptive suffering. And really, redemptive suffering is suffering or going through a problem or pain for the benefit of others. And we've been given the greatest example of someone suffering and going through pain for the benefit of others. Who do you think it is? Jesus, right? Jesus. Jesus died on a cross that he didn't deserve for people that he knew would reject him, people that he knew would go the opposite of what he told them, so that we might know a home in heaven. And so there are many different causes for problems, many different causes for pain in your life, and a lot of it is just because of stupid decisions, right? So in some cases, we create our own problems, right? And I've given the illustration of me buying the motorcycle, and I was having this battle with God, and I really shouldn't have bought that motorcycle, but I went and did it anyways, and then it caused a lot of problems down the road for me. Kind of like that. You spend money on things that you really don't need or you really can't afford, and the next thing you know that you've accumulated a debt, and you think that somehow in the future this money's just going to show up and magically appear, and next thing you know your house is being foreclosed on. You can't go blame God that you're losing your house. God, why am I losing my house? Well, I mean, you've kind of you've helped that along by not being a good steward of your money and of your finances. But in the same breath, some of your problems you're innocent in, right? You've suffered at the hands of others' stupidity, right? Other people's sins, other people's wrongdoing towards you. And some of the pain in your life is for redemptive suffering, so that you can one day be able to share that with others and minister to other people about the experience, so that one day that wound becomes a scar. And then when someone asks you about that, you can say, oh yeah, I remember when this happened. Let me tell you. And it's a conversation piece. And I love scars. My wife hates scars. I have scars all over me. But we can use that to help others. But it involves us being honest with ourselves, being honest with God, being honest with each other. And if we can do that, we'll be on that road to healing, that road to redemption. And with that, it's time to face the pain. Patrick.
Talk about our our challenge for this week. And let's be honest, the challenge this week is going to be a little more difficult. We've talked about praying. The first challenge was going home and praying that God's going to open your heart to this. Second was memorizing, casting your cares upon Him, for He careth for you. This one's a little bit stronger. It's going to be a little bit harder for you. It's like when you break a bone and it doesn't set right. Sometimes they have to re-break it to set it the right way. So some of these past pains that we have that we've kind of buried, where we've just grown to live this lie, and we've become comfortable in our lie, pretending it didn't happen. It's time to open it back up. It's time to address it. It's time to be transparent. So this week your challenge is to address your effect. Maybe you choose, so we're going to look, before we get there, maybe you're going to look at the effect that you chose during your action point. So open your pamphlet back up. The effect that you chose, whether it's You get angry all the time at meaningless things. You are judgmental, whatever it is. So during this week, you're going to be transparent and drill down to find the cause of this effect. And I'm not just saying, yeah, I was abused as a kid. I already know that. There's the cause. No, why is that equaling this? And now let's deal with why it equals this. Let's not let it equal this anymore. So let me give you an example. Maybe you chose that you always assume bad motives of others. So you're going to ask yourself, why do I always choose bad motives of others? So when you're transparent with yourself, you realize that when you were taken advantage of when you were a child, or maybe you were taken advantage in a past marriage or something like that, taken advantage of, maybe when you were a kid. And because you were hurt as a kid, you had to start looking out for yourself. And that caused you to develop the habit of always assuming ulterior motives. So there's the cause. Yes, that pain happened, and you're never going to be able to make that pain not have happened. As much as we'd love to, I'd love to go back in time and be able to take those pains that I dealt with and make them so that they didn't happen. But if I did that, I wouldn't be the same guy that's up here right now. I wouldn't be what God wanted me to be at this point. And I can't explain to you why God lets those things happen. I can't. No one can really no one can lay down and say, God let this happen so that this will happen. Down the line, you may be able to look back and say, well, now I know why God let that happen. But no one can give you that answer. And you're going to look for it, and you're not going to find it. But what I can tell you is, God doesn't want you to hold on to it in a negative way. God doesn't want you to deal with it with not really dealing with it and let it sort of be this burden on your back. God wants you to deal with it, and he wants you to give it to him. That's why we memorize that verse, cast your cares upon him, for he careth for you. So, we're going to think of what this effect is. It's not okay to just say, this is how I am because of my past. I hear that's an excuse a lot. It's just who I am. It's just who I am. Did you really have to tell that guy off? Well, it's just who I am. Okay, well, don't let that be you anymore. Don't be defined by your past. Before I was saved, I was a sinner headed to hell. I could just say, well, that's just who I am, God. I'm just this sinner headed to hell. You can't change that. He can change it, and he wants to change it. So just like you developed a habit to assume poor intentions, you will need to reprogram your brain, or retrain your brain, as they say in that commercial, to rid yourself of that habit. And it's not going to be overnight, and you're not going to just wake up one morning and suddenly you're a completely different Christian. I remember I watched this movie once. I don't remember what it was about, but it was a Christian movie, and there was these motorcycle guys, and one guy got in an accident, and he got saved when he thought he was going to die. The next morning he woke up, and all of a sudden he was super Christian. Like, he didn't want to have anything to do with his girlfriend. He didn't want to watch a bad movie or listen to bad music. I'm sorry, that's not how life happens. You're not going to wake up and that pain's going to be gone. You're not going to wake up and that habit's going to be completely taken care of. It's a process, step by step. So if you are that person who assumes bad intentions because you were taken advantage of as a kid, then maybe it's time that you at least trust some people. Find someone that you can trust, someone that you know has proven themselves. So you're there. Now you trust one person. You don't assume bad intentions with them. And then a little bit later on, you can maybe try another one. But you deal with it. Don't just bury it. Now, you may need to work through this challenge with someone else. And can I recommend that you work through this challenge with someone else? You know, Angel had a hard time telling me at first what he went through. But after it was out, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we talked about it pretty freely, right? Once he said it, once it was out on the table, there wasn't an issue anymore. You can't take it back. It's not like I was going to forget. So when you finally say that to that person, at least it's out there and you can start dealing with it. That's the hard part, is that first, this is what happened, or this is how it makes me feel. But once it's out there, the two of you can work on it together, the three of you, or whoever it is. Find someone. Work through the challenge, someone you can trust. It is good to find those to be transparent with and work through the cause and the effect. So be transparent this week. Address the effect. We're going to go ahead and close in prayer. Again, I just want to really emphasize this challenge. Take it to heart. Don't just come hear this message and shake your head yes and really feel, oh yeah, this is great, Pat and Angel. I really appreciate the series. Do something with it. When Pastor preaches, do something with that. Don't just come in, fill a seat, and go home. It's very easy to do that. So I want to pray that God's going to burden your heart with this, that you're going to address the effects in your life. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I thank you for this day, and I thank you for the message, and I thank you for Angel bringing it, God. And I just pray you can help the people in this room to take this challenge home, help them to find that person to deal with it with them, help them to deal with it with you, help them be transparent and